Do you often find yourself being lost, confused, overwhelmed, not sure where to turn, not sure what's real, not sure why other people don't get things that you do? Me too. But I would say if there's anything that has really, if there's one idea that has really helped me to navigate the world more than any other, it's probably this one that I want to share in this episode. And it's the idea that most of us are in a lot more of a automated and actually trance-like state than we realize. And one of the characteristics of being in that trance-like state is that we are more affected by words than we should be, although that's case by case, but overall. And then we are less aware of and dealing with actual objective reality than than we would ideally be. And I think this is worth talking about in a health podcast because, first of all, this has a massive impact on our health. You know, the decisions we make, the way that we perceive things, and obviously the level of stress we have, all have a big impact on our health. And so this mechanism is a really important part of that. This is something that I studied 20 years ago. It's something that's been talked about for really thousands of years by different, religious systems, philosophical systems, esoteric systems. But it's something that at least a decent amount of modern research actually backs up. And so I want to talk about this, what the impacts of it are, how to tell if it's the case for you and the people around you, and how to, most importantly, I guess, how to be more free of this limitation so you can be more effective in every area of your life, including making the right decisions and creating the right environment for yourself and all the rest of it for your optimal health and well-being.
Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, Elwyn Robinson, the creator and founder of Advanced Health Genetics, and also the Hormetics Weight Optimization System, and he's also the author of the Rejuvenate Blueprint. So lovely listeners, make sure you stick around so you can find out actually if you might be someone who is stuck in that trance-like state and how it may be affecting your health. So please remember to hit that like and subscribe button to help our algorithm and keep everybody coming here. And let's go ahead and dive right in. So Elwyn, tell me, you said you were studying this 20 years ago. What got you to that place of either wanting to study it or how you found yourself in that position to be studying this?
Yeah, really more than that. And I just want to clarify one point that you made there. And this is the thing that's the hardest to accept and swallow. You are in that trance-like state, almost certainly. It is a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of people who are not in it, and the vast majority of the time. And so that's really what we're going to talk about, including me. So that's what we're going to talk about, what that means, what the implications are. We'll talk about some of the research which actually backs up that point. And then, of course, most importantly, what to do about it. But yeah, to answer your question, so around the time of my 19th birthday, I had what could either be called a spiritual awakening or a nervous breakdown. I don't want to argue with, either side. If when I'm talking about it, you're like, oh, well, you just had a psychotic episode, no problem. I'm not going to argue with you. If you're like, no, Elwyn, it really sounds like you had some, real spiritual, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm not going to argue with you either. That's fine. I'm happy to accept either definition. And maybe by the end of this episode, you'll understand why I'm not bothered, even though, one of them maybe comes with a lot of prestige and one of them comes with a lot of shame or, whatever. Not to me. I don't think things are as simple and clear cut like that. And, well, I won't make you wait the whole episode to tell you why. It's because those are just labels. Those are just two different labels to define a specific period of my life and also to describe a specific sequence of things, which is fairly common, that has happened throughout human history to a lot of humans. Not the majority, but certainly not that unusual either, that they have this kind of moment where they realize that the world is a lot bigger than they think it is, and that there's a lot deeper than they think it is, and there's more going on, and there's maybe more dimensions. Dimension doesn't have to be like sci-fi, but just like, maybe, like, for instance, if someone's extremely robotic and rational, maybe they discover the dimension of emotion, or if someone's extremely in their head and in their imagination, they discover the dimension of physicality, right? And all these things they can do with their body. So I'm not talking about anything necessarily supernatural at all, but just like becoming aware. An example of things is, unless you had a really traumatic childhood, there probably was a time where, like, you were completely unaware of sex, right? And then something happened, and you go through some kind of transformation, and then suddenly you are aware of this whole dimension. Oh, that's why those two went off in a room on their own, which you didn't understand when you were a little kid. All of that kind of stuff, right? So that's an example of what I'm talking about as an awakening, or a different dimension of life. It can be as simple as that. It doesn't have to be anything supernatural or anything like that. So when I was 19, I became aware of a lot of different dimensions all simultaneously. I think the biggest one is just I was what I would call a diehard materialist. I absolutely did not believe in anything beyond this being a very materialistic clockwork universe. And I would say, in hindsight, having studied this a lot, I was in a Newtonian view of like a Newtonian physics. And so, since then, there was an Einsteinian view of physics, which, talks about matter and energy being interchangeable. And then there's a quantum level of physics, which talks about all kinds of things which are quite hard to understand, but which we may or may not get into. Maybe not in this episode, it's not super relevant. But anyway, the quantum kind of implications of the quantum view of physics, and physics is really, supposed to be the map of reality, actually allows for a lot of things which are considered nonsense from a purely mechanistic Newtonian point of view. It allows for them, doesn't necessarily prove them. So the way that it happened for me, Chrissy, is, as I said, I was a diehard materialist. I'd had things happen before, but I kind of waved off as a coincidence. I remember once my friends and I are sitting around, and like we just decided to guess cards, and they pulled like playing cards from a pack, and I guessed 4 correctly in a row. Now the chance of that, so it's 1 in 52, but then there's one less, there's 1 in 51, and there's 1 in 50. So I think roughly the chance of that are, let me just do the maths in my head now, 2,500 times 2,500. So 1 in 6 million, something like that. But I just brushed it off. Well, these things happen. And then I think what it was is like, okay, I'm going to do it again. And I tried it, and I got it wrong, and then I got it wrong. And it's funny, like when I didn't have any kind of attachment to it, when we were just messing around, I got 4 right. And as soon as I was like, oh my God, then I didn't do it anymore. And despite the impressiveness of how accurate that was, I ignored it. That was as I think a lot of people would. And you could say, look, this is the theory that I think they sometimes talk about in quantum physics, that like to try and explain the concept of infinity, they say if you had an infinite amount of chimps in front of an infinite amount of typewriters, eventually one of them would write the complete works of Shakespeare. And the idea being, no, not that the chimp is necessarily ever going to understand it, but the point is, if you just hit random keys long enough, eventually you'll come up with long enough being the key term, of course, you'll eventually come up with the complete works of Shakespeare. So sure enough, if you have enough people guessing enough card, eventually you'll get someone like me who guesses 4 in a row. Okay, so that's how the materialists review it. Fine. But I was messing with different things, and like one of them was like I Ching, I think, which is kind of a tool of divination, like tarot cards, but it's a Taoist Chinese kind of version of it, which is very binary. So it's like yin and yang, 2, 4, and there's like 64 different options basically, and you get it by throwing a series of coins, or like traditionally with stalks of wood, and it will and so I would be like asking questions and just again messing around, playing with it. But I was like shocked again and again at how accurate it seemed to be. Now, maybe this is all delusion, and we'll talk about the possibility of that when we talk about what I said earlier about people being in a trance. But I remember at one point, what happened is I did a reading, and it was about something that I thought was really bad. And I get like a result that everything's really good. And I was like, even though I didn't really believe it, still kind of you're playing a game and you're going along with it. And I was like, oh, that's good news, you know? And then I realized that I tricked myself with my mind. And because, as I said, this is quite a binary thing, the actual reading was the exact opposite of what I thought it was. I just transposed everything in my mind. It was saying, this situation is really terrible. And there was something about that, about me kind of trying to trick myself into thinking it was the opposite, and then it really was. And like as a culmination of doing all these experiments and being surprised again and again and again and again. And this is, I gave the 4 cards in a row as an example earlier, because that was like that, that was all within a minute or two. But then I went back to normal where I couldn't guess, and it's like, oh, never mind. But this is over the course of days. I kept guessing and I kept getting these correct answers, and it kind of just blew my mind. And it's not like I suddenly believed in everything, but it's like suddenly everything was possible, and it opened my mind, and then I started to investigate all kinds of things. And so, fast forward. So one of the many people I enjoyed, and I think, at the time, I committed myself to a kind of ascetic lifestyle, not totally, but for instance, I stopped watching TV, movies, video games. So all I would do is, and there was no phones in those days, so all I would do is read books, and then I would actually listen to music. That was the only other thing I allowed myself. But I didn't allow myself any other kind of media. So certainly no news, no TV, no anything like that. And so I was reading a lot of books, and I was unemployed a lot of the time throughout my 20s. And so I was reading a lot of books. I read a lot of books, thousands of books, literally. And one of the categories was this author called Robert Anton Wilson, who I think has 20-something books, read all of them at least once. And he had, a bunch of different interesting theories, but a lot of Robert Anton Wilson's books, if you read them, if you were to try and define the primary goal of them, the primary goal seems to be to make you less convinced that you definitely know what's what. He really helps to popularize the idea of postmodernism, which I'm not necessarily a fan of, and subjectivism. So the idea that he really believed, which I don't anymore, that there is no such thing as objective reality, and that it's all a matter of perception. And so, even though I don't believe that, it was still a very helpful training for me, because it helped me to realize that certainly every human being's view of things is profoundly often different and subjective, and there's all kinds of exercises make you do, like one person go into a room and focus on everything the color brown, and another person go into a room focus on everything the color blue, both go back out the room, have a talk about what they see, and there's almost no overlap between, there'll be some, but very little, this room was full of this, and the other one, no, it wasn't, it was full of this, it's because they're focusing on different things. There's all that kind of thing. That was maybe not the best example just off the top of my head, but there's so much of that to help you see how much of your perception and then also memory is subjective. So that's pretty interesting as a mental exercise, but as I said, ultimately, I don't even agree with it. But there was, several other things. Maybe should I say why I don't agree with it?
I was just going to ask, why don't you, or what changed your mind so that you're in a position where that's not what you believe anymore?
I think it is true that most people are living in subjective bubbles, including me. I don't want to, make myself like fundamentally elevated, because it's not true. But I also think it's true, and this is the theory I'm going to share in most of this episode, that there is an objective reality, and that our lack of connection with it, both individually and collectively, is what causes most of the problems in the world. And so a philosophy that espouses that there is no such thing as objective reality It leads to a few things which I didn't realize, and I'm pretty sure Robert Anton Wilson didn't realize, but probably the worst thing is this. If you cannot agree that there is a truth, so, you might be like, I think it's this, no, I think it's this. There's like a debate, right? That's fine. But if you can't agree that there is any such thing, then it inevitably leads to tyranny. Because if there is no such thing as an objective truth, then the truth just comes down to whoever's the most powerful.
Right. Whoever can push that story through. Because if you have an example, I mean, something that just popped into my head is that if we all agree the truth is I put the pen on the table, like, would that be an example of an objective truth? Chrissy put the pen on the table.
But what if there is someone there who has who wants to claim credit for it and who is a little bit delusional, and they think that they did it and everyone else is scared of them and intimidated by them? If there is no such thing as objective reality, then it will tend to will go along with the most powerful person, as opposed to the truth actually matters. The fact that Chrissy actually did it matters. If there is no such thing as the fact that Chrissy actually did it, because there is no such thing as objective reality, then all that matters is social cohesion, social harmony, and not being hurt, not being killed, not being ostracized by the tribe. All these other instinctual things come into play and become primary, and then the fact of who actually did what becomes not just secondary, like it often is for people in this day and age and in general, I would say, but it's not even a thing, right? If there's no such thing as objective reality, that there is no definite fact of who did it. And this is a little bit, what quantum physics, if it's interpreted in a specific way by people like Wilson, also lead to. It's the Schrodinger's cat experiment, which I think is quite well known of, is the cat in the box alive or not? What they would say is it's neither exists in the quantum state until the act of observation occurs. And this is based on the fact that on a subatomic level, so when you're looking at the, let's say, stuff, for want of a better word, even smaller than atoms, if you measure it with a energy, specifically light measuring device, it looks like a photon, so an energetic thing. And if you look at it with a thing measuring device, then it looks like a particle. So it looks like matter or energy depending on what you use to measure it. So that's one interesting thing. Another interesting thing is that when you look at it, when you observe subatomic particles, they behave differently than when you're not observing them. And so this really undid the whole thing of objective reality for a lot of people. And now some people really took the quantum physics thing and ran with it, people like Wilson, who's certainly not the only one, into a full-on, the nature of the universe is magical, everything is open to interpretation and change, blah, blah, blah. The mainstream quantum physicists certainly don't say that. What they say is that this flexibility of reality is only true on the subatomic level. So it is true that the subatomic, whatever they are, particles, photons, etc., behave differently depending on all kinds of things, but it's not true on a macro, you and me level. So that's how they kind of resolve that to prevent, all of physics, which is supposed to be the underpinning of what is reality in science, flipping into a completely animist, magical universe, is they say it only applies on the subatomic level. Okay, fair enough. That's their view. But as I said, a lot of them will run with it and say, see, that's proof that there is no such thing as objective reality. I would argue with that. So I give them one reason, but I'll give another reason. And this really ties in. I wasn't planning to say any of this, but these are all great questions and points. And I think they all actually go nicely into the main point I want to go into, which is that just because if you measure it with one thing, it looks like one thing, and just because then if you measure it with another thing, it looks like another thing, doesn't mean that it has no objective existence. It merely means that your measuring tools give you different data. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, yeah.
Just like, like is this person a nice person or a nasty person? So if I go and have a conversation with someone, maybe they're really nice to me and I'm like, oh, this is a nice person. Maybe if you go and have a conversation with the same person, they're really nasty to you and you're like, this is a nasty person. Now, you and I could disagree about that, but maybe it's because we have different tools of measuring. That doesn't mean that there's no objective truth to whether this person is overall nice or nasty. Maybe maybe they're 50-50, but maybe they do spend most of the time being nasty or most of the time being nice. And we can say overall they're more this than that. But the measuring tools are inadequate to be able to do that. Does that make sense?
Yes,
and
it does.
It's very hard to categorize people, obviously, correctly as nice or nasty because a lot of it is context dependent. And yet, what a lot of the postmodernist subjectivists will do is say, therefore, there's no such thing as morality. That's one of the other. So one of the problems with subjectivism, as I just said, is it leads to tyranny because it ends up that reality is whatever I say it is as the most powerful, dominant person, usually backed by physical violence or threats of physical violence, because that's the thing that ultimately ends all arguments, right? If you and I disagree and neither of us are willing to let it go, then in the end, if we don't agree to disagree, how are we going to solve who wins?
Exactly.
That's the last kind of bastion, and so that's why it's important to believe there is a physical, an objective reality. But here's the other thing, and this is, for me as a truth-focused person, that's the thing that I'm most bothered about. But I can see from a religious perspective that what I'm about to say would be the most pressing thing, and I also think it's very important, is if there's no such thing as objective reality, then it's very easy to make the leap that there's no such thing as true, right, and wrong. That it's all subjective. And of course, from that, it's very easy to go, and therefore, I can do whatever I want, right? Or anyone like me can do whatever they want. And you get into a thing where judging people for behaving in a certain way, ironically, is the only thing that's considered wrong. So things like prejudice, condemnation, judgment, all these things, they all have a really negative connotation because it's like, how could you judge someone? Everyone has a right to their own subjective feelings. Everyone has the right to their own subjective identity. Everyone has the right to their own subjective decisions. Everyone has the right to their own perception of what is and isn't real, and also their own perception of what is and isn't good and true. And so weirdly, in a world like that, which unfortunately we are getting more and more to in many ways, there still is a right and wrong because human beings reflexively always act like there is a right and wrong. But the right and wrong is not based on any traditional or maybe objective criteria. It's based purely on those who are permissive versus those who are not. And those who are permissive are considered to be good, and those who are not permissive are considered to be bad because they are not kind, not loving, not tolerant, not accepting, whatever it might be, because they don't go along with everyone's subjective belief, feeling, perception, whatever you want to call it, about what is right and wrong. There are dangers on both ends. If you go too far into objectivism, especially in a world the way this one is, which is the main thing I want to talk about, the danger is people get wrong ideas about objective reality, enforce those rigidly, and then you get a tyranny of, more traditional tyranny, where, this group is right, this group is wrong, this action is right, this action is wrong, and then there is severe judgment and condemnation of anyone who's part of the out group, out belief, out identity, out whatever, right? So there is danger in that as well. I'm not denying that there is danger in that. I'm just saying there's also danger in this trend, which is the case more and more. And it's because of this challenge of human nature full stop, which is the main thing that I wanted to talk about today, which is, so even though I believe the postmodernists, what I call the subjectivists, all the rest of it, I believe are wrong, there is such a thing as objective reality. And not just that that's my opinion, but it's very important to hold that belief or understanding, because as you said, like with the pen on the table thing, especially if you're the one who did it, you know you're the one who did it, right? That is the objective reality. This is part of the problem with my problem with these people as well. This is on a more personal over the third thing. Is like everyone knows that there's an objective reality. It's just it's way for most of us, it's way less. Like I don't know. Not only do I not know if human beings went to the moon, I don't even know if there is a moon, right? Like some people claim it's like a projection or this or that, and I don't know for sure, right? I can believe certain people that it exists and the evidence and this and that, but I don't know that for sure because I've never been there, right? And I've never even myself built a probe or something to go up there and check. So I don't know that for sure. But there are some things that I do know for sure because I'm there right now, right? But the amount that we actually know for sure is way less than we think it is. Way, way, way less. And this is why when you get into the world of conspiracy theories and, you hear that most of the top politicians and celebrities are really clones or they're really reptiles or they're really holograms or all this kind of thing. And it's like, maybe you've met them. I spent time with a handful of them. I know people who spent time with a lot of them. Again, if you spent time with, I don't know, whoever, Madonna, then you're going to know that she's not at least a hologram because you touched her hand. I suppose you still wouldn't know if she's a clone or a reptile, technically, a reptile shapeshifter or whatever. But, like you only know as much as you know based on experience at most. And then the challenge is, this concept, which is what I want to talk about. So, in fact, shall I stop there and say anything before I go to the next thing?
No, I think you've covered a great overview because that really helps put into perspective, line everybody up for what's coming next. Because now we have this definition of, okay, I understand that. Because it is that truth that I've really discovered, as you just very, very well, in a great way, laid out, is that we actually don't know as much as we think we do.
Nowhere near as much, yeah. And the reason why there's at least two reasons why we pretend that we do.
Why do you think?
I get into the main thrust.
Yeah, what are those?
First of all, because it's terrifying to acknowledge how little we know. That's the first thing. And then second of all, because it's not practical to acknowledge how little we know. So I'll give an example of this. Like awareness is a great burden to most people for reasons that I'll explain when I go through this theory. But just to give an example, a significant minority of people are afraid to fly, right? Because they don't feel in control of the situation. Someone else is driving, there's a pilot, they feel completely, and so therefore they're afraid. Often they're control-oriented people. But the truth is, the objective fact, unless you think all the data collectors and distributors are liars, is that it's actually safer to go on a plane than a bus, a taxi, your own car, whatever. So that's more based on feelings than facts. But here's the other thing. Here's the thing I wanted to point out. Like when you get into a new car, you don't know it's being built correctly. You don't know what, like it could blow up. A bunch of cars do every year. A bunch of cars, the brakes fail every year. Certainly if you get in a taxi, you don't know if that person driving you is drunk, doesn't care about being alive anymore. Like, there's all kinds of things. And so we even eating food, this is like a rabbit hole that obviously people in this podcast are more likely to get into. But, forget about the amount of, pesticides, mycotoxins and heavy metals in food. What about the, allowable levels of rat feces or ground up cockroaches or et cetera, et cetera? Like, you don't want to think about that when you're about to, sit down and eat dinner. You don't want to think about, all the failings of the people who built the vehicle that you're driving in that will kill you, or that someone else is driving you in. You don't want to think about all the mistakes and corners cut by the people who prepared whatever you're about to consume. And if you do, and some people do, you often end up being a nervous wreck. Like the awareness is actually worse than in most cases. Obviously, if you get in a car badly made and it blows up, then that is worse than the awareness. But in most practical situations, most of the time, the awareness of everything that could be wrong is even more debilitating than the actual things. Not always, like in some cases, and this is a short-term versus long-term thing, right? So short-term is more debilitating to, I never consume anything without reading the ingredients label. Almost every person I know, without fail, doesn't do that. they look at it, they say, oh, it said sugar-free, it said natural, it said organic. And I said, yeah, that's the description at the front. But what you do is you turn it around and you look at the ingredients at the back and you read it and see what's, and again, they may be lying about that and they may be leaving stuff out there. But even just what is claimed there is often bad enough for me to be, to disqualify me actually consuming that. But so short term to medium term, when I try and instill this simple habit of people of looking at the ingredients, I know it creates more anxiety in them. And you could say, and I think that whether they're willing to say it to me or not, that is probably their argument for why they don't do it. But medium to long term, it is wise to check what you're putting in your body and not trust the food companies to necessarily keep everything safe and healthy for you, right? So that's a bit of an argument about what is actually better in that regard. So that's at least two reasons why I think that people will not want to know not want to know how little they know and pretend to know a lot more than they do.
No, I mean, that's a great point because yes, it would be absolutely terrifying. 100%. Yeah, the rabbit holes that exist within that space. Yes.
So most people won't even look at the ingredients label about what should be in there, what's claimed to be out there, let alone look into what might actually be in there and what is legally allowed to be there in terms of ground up cockroaches and rat dung and all the rest of it. That's outside of what they want to be aware of, and that makes sense. And this is where no, I won't talk about that. All right, I'm going to go into this actual theory. Okay, because it's a bit of a crazy one when you first hear it. I don't know if you've heard this before, Chrissy, or what your view on this will be. So this will be interesting. We touched on it before we talked about it, but I certainly didn't make the case. So as I said, Wilson, very interesting. I'm glad I read him in many ways, but I am maybe not glad I took on board his ideas as much as I did, and I'm happy now to have realized the inaccuracies and limitations of them. But there is at least one thing that really stuck with me, and he was more talking about the work of someone else. So there's someone called Gurdjieff, G.I. Gurdjieff, and he was Russian, I believe. I read one of his books once, but it was a shit show for reasons I'll explain in a bit. But his student called P.D. Uspensky, his main book was Search of the Miraculous, and he was his translator. I think Gurdjieff didn't know English, and he was kind of his explainer in the Western world. And so, through Rob Anton Wilson, I kind of learned, this line of ideas, but which was certainly not unique to them. And I know when I'm saying this, there's probably going to be at least one person who's going to be at least thinking of not putting in the comments, but Elwin, I've heard of this before, or this idea has been around for thousands of years, whatever it might be, which I'll say true, true, true. Of course, if something is objectively true, then it's very unlikely that these people whose names I just mentioned were the first or only people who realized it. It's actually been realized and understood by some throughout history and even prehistory. I get that. I'm just giving you where I got it from. And it's this idea that most people are in a state of trance. He would actually, these guys would call it like being asleep. But the concept is not like literally somnambulistic sleepwalking, but kind of. It gives you an idea of what we're talking about.
But it's different from dissociation.
Yes, but only kind of. Dissociation would be more like dissociation is more disconnection from the body specifically, at a very extreme level if it's going to be diagnosed. This is more a disassociation from reality, objective reality. So this is to go back to the earlier point, when you see how little both human beings and the instruments they create, whether it's the photon meter or the particle meter or whatever, how little connection and understanding they have of objective reality, it's easy to throw the baby out of the bathwater and say, therefore, there is no such thing. And there's a certain arrogance and pridefulness around that, right? Like, if we're not perceiving it, it must be because it doesn't exist. But that is actually, I won't put that label on it. That's a certain school of thought's way of viewing it, which, as I said, I think it leads to things like tyranny and also chaos. I didn't really focus on that, but some people, I guess, are not as afraid of tyranny as they should be. So how about this? What about chaos? What about no one can agree? If you think, like it's bad enough to be under some kind of dictatorship, and it is bad, but what about if every also member of the dictatorship is only going along with it because they're afraid of violence, but everyone actually is constantly disagreeing with each other, and no one, is on the same page, and no one is aligned, and no one is in harmony? It's a terrible system for many reasons, but it's understandable given, and this is what people like Gurdjieff and Uspensky were trying to explain, how little connection most of us have to actual objective reality, as proven by people like Robert Anton Wilson. If you go through and do his exercises and all the examples he gives, and it's like, wow, yeah, there are a lot of people disconnected. There are a lot of people who are maybe hallucinating, seeing things that aren't there. I remember Robert Anton Wilson and similarly named but completely different, not related, Colin Wilson. Colin Wilson, also dozens of books, English writer. He talked, a lot about supernatural things, but from a very skeptical point of view. I don't think he ever believed in anything specifically. But I remember him talking about, how easy it is to get caught up in a mass delusion. Robert Anton Wilson talks about that as well. I think I mentioned this in the podcast once before, but I'll talk about this again. So if one person says, I'm seeing whatever, and no one around them is seeing it, we say they're hallucinating, and we probably say they're schizophrenic, maybe having a psychotic episode or whatever. Now, if two people see the same thing, what we tend to call that is a shared hallucination. Sometimes it's referred to as folie à deux, which was what the second Joker film was named after recently. Haven't seen it. Apparently it's not good. But anyway, this concept of a crazy person can draw in another person, maybe a perfectly sane person. I think that's where the Joker story started. Like, I think the idea is the character, he persuaded his own psychiatrist that his crazy reality was actually a real one. And this is actually not unheard of. I just saw a news story the other day of someone who was like a psychopath murderer who managed to persuade his female psychologist, to kind of go along with him and help him escape. And then they both went to South America. And then, a year or two later, he killed her. Like, they just found her body. And it's like, how do situations like that happened? She was a rational person. She was a trained psychologist. If anyone should be able to not fall into the bullshit of a charismatic psychopath, you would think. And also she was in this institutional setting where all these safeguards are in place to stop her from falling for it. But maybe it would be more likely to happen if, they met in a bar or something like that. But he was supposed to be like a patient, under lock and key, all this kind of thing. It still happened, right? So, and then people... And the subjectivists say, who's to say what's real? Who's to say that he was bullshitting? But he killed her. He beheaded her. So, that's... he probably, I doubt if she knew that's where it was heading, that she would have gone along with him, right? So, the point being, it's very... Now, why is it very... You see those examples, right? And there's a lot of prejudice, obviously, that's based on inaccuracies and... it's like, oh, well, if it's someone uneducated who falls for this kind of person or this kind of group, then it's because they're ignorant, it's because they're uneducated, it's because they're lower social class, whatever, disparaging things might be said. But as I said, it happens to, wealthy people, it happens to famous people, it happens to successful people, it happens to highly educated people, it happens to highly intelligent people, that they fall for these things, often, more than once, again and again. It happened to, it's a little bit embarrassing, but the woman who wrote the introduction to my first book ended up falling under the spell of a charismatic psychopath. Luckily, there was no violence, but she did this fraud thing. She ended up in prison. And, there's a Netflix documentary about her. I won't give any more away, but, and it's sad. And she was, I know, I spoke to her before she met him, and she was really on the strain at the time, and I wasn't really able to help very well because, it was limited. She was in a different continent, all the rest of it. But anyway, and she was a prominent person within the health world. And how does something like that happen? to her. She was very intelligent. She was very independent-minded, not a follower by any means, and yet she got caught in this web. So right now I'm giving examples like one person falling for one person, or I've mentioned occasionally one person falling for a group. What about if it's a bigger group, What about if it's dozens of people, I won't mention anyone because I don't want to upset or alienate anyone, but, there's certain groups that all of us can think of where we're like, that's crazy. Why did anyone go along with that? But they do. And sometimes it's not only dozens or hundreds. Sometimes it's thousands and it's millions. And sometimes it's more. And so that's like going along with belief systems that maybe are divorced from reality. But what about full-on hallucinations? And so Robert Anton Wilson and Colin Wilson, I think both did a good job in their own way of cataloging this. And a lot of this I've read 25 years ago, but I remember one of the ones from Robert Anton Wilson, he kept kind of escalating it. He's like, okay, is it a hallucination if 2 people see it? Yeah. Okay, what about if 5 people see it? Yeah. What about if 100 people see it? Yeah. And he gives the example of a Brazilian soccer match. I can't remember when it was, probably in the 80s or 90s. And basically it was like tens of thousands of people. It might even be over 100,000 people. And almost everyone who went there who was asked reported that they saw this huge vision of the Virgin Mary appear above the soccer fields. And Robert Anton Wilson's point was not that it definitely was the Virgin Mary or that it definitely was there, but his point was if 100,000 people or something like that, 50,000, whatever, can collectively all see the same hallucination, then what else might we be hallucinating about that we think that we're seeing that's not really there, that we just take for granted as if it was there? Which I thought was a really good and interesting question.
Yeah, that is an excellent question, because how do we know?
How do you know for sure? And so asking that question is dangerous. It can be. This is like the Matrix movie is an example of it. There's another movie called They Live. So the Matrix is more about like, is this world really real? They Live is a little bit more about like, is it being controlled by a certain, powerful group? But actually the best example of what the theory that I'm kind of started sharing, we'll share this episode, is probably actually a movie called Virtual Nightmare, which almost no one has seen and heard of, but I think you can occasionally see on cable TV or like something. And it was obviously written by people who truly understand this. Unfortunately, it wasn't a huge budget. And I won't spoil too much, but I imagine almost no one even has the ability to see it. I think I found it as a torrent like 10 years ago or something. I don't think it's got distribution. But the reason why I think it was more profound than movies that are much more well-known, like The Matrix or Dark City or They Live or anything else, is because it was far more closer to the truth. And the people kind of go through a series of awakenings in the movie. And so I guess I'll tell this and get back to the theory. So the first awakening they get through is like this idea that there's this evil conspiracy to keep people enslaved or something like that. And then they realize that's not true. And then they go through another awakening or realization that actually, like, there's this group of people that's trying to save humanity. And this is, like the things you see sometimes about ascended masters and the Great Brotherhood and this and that. There's this thing trying to elevate humanity, and they fall into that for a while. And then they realize that that's also not true. And then, I'm obviously massively cutting this short, but at the end of the movie, what they realize is that reality is a lot more sparse than they think it is, and most of what people are interacting with and reacting to is just words, that they are in such a hypnotic trance that they act like it's reality. And the movie is obviously a symbolic representation, so it's a bit silly, but it's like, rather than actually watching on TV, there's just like a word there that says like entertainment, or rather than actually rather than a real plant that they're looking at, it just says the word plant, and that's good enough. And so the kind of what they're trying to get at here is that for most people, words are more real than reality. And so this is the fundamental thing that I want you to understand if you're watching this, to consider, to be aware of within yourself, but also other people, and to like consider if this is something that you want to lessen the effect of. And the reason why I'm saying it, this has been humans' fate. This has been human state during all of recorded history. So there's nothing new about any of this, all the way back at least to ancient Egypt and ancient Babylon, and who there's all kinds of speculation as to what there was before then. Like we've always been in this. What concerns me specifically at the moment is that we're getting, like, compared to when I was young and reading all this stuff, like say 20, 25 years ago, we're getting into a world where the culture shifted so that treating words as if they're more real than reality has become much more common, and it's even being codified into law. And so everything that has been going on the whole time, and everything that these guys talked about, I think the reason why we're accepting what's being done to us, either by some nefarious, outside force, or merely by ourselves who are going deeper and deeper into the illusion, or some kind of combination, we're getting more and more stuck in this trap. I guess that's the point I'm making. And I've said before about, why I think that there's so much stress these days. I've read, as I said, pretty widely, and one of the other books I really like is Abundance by I think Robert Cialdini and Stephen Kotler. It was written quite a few years ago now, but it's based. And The Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley, and they basically make the case that everything is better than it used to be. Pretty much everything is going in a great direction, and especially Matt Ridley talks about this. The only reason we don't see this is because we have such a bias to focus on the negative. And there's some truth to this. Certainly in terms of our material reality, some things got better. Although I think they're not focusing enough on the fact that there's more poison in, some things than we used to have. But they make the point, which is true, like water is safer to drink than it used to be in general, despite all the things that you and I might. It's still not going to make you sick and kill you as often as it used to. They point out until recently, a lot of people, like over 10% of people would die of smoke inhalation because the only way to keep your dwelling warm was to light a fire, and often the ventilation wasn't very good. So, like, as much as we talk about toxins these days, and it's not in any way optimal, our ancestors were also exposed to a lot of toxins. Our ancestors were exposed to a lot of starvation, a lot of poverty, a lot of lack of opportunity, a lot of lack of resources. We weren't able to travel, a lack of information compared to now to an incredible extent. And some things were better, like the carrots would have been more nutritious and less full of poisons, but it might have been harder to get a carrot, So it's like, in many ways, things are better than ever now. I guess that's the point I'm making. And in many ways as well, they are worse. But the ways that they're worse are more, I would say, actually, overall not objective. They are related to all the things that we're going to talk about here. But unfortunately, because we are the way it doesn't matter if they're objective or not. It affects us just as much. And so I know that is all very theoretical. So let me be more specific and practical. So let me explain the actual idea first. So they had this idea that most people, most of the time, are in a trance, and the special way that you can tell is that they treat words and symbols as more real than reality. So what does that mean? Let's give an example. So, and I'm going to try and avoid anything that's controversial and political and stuff, and just stick to stuff that's really, I would hope, indisputable. So, have you ever been in a relationship, or have you ever seen anyone in a relationship with someone who often tells them that they love them, but in reality are quite abusive and or neglectful to them, right?
Yeah.
So maybe, maybe they're actually, maybe they're screaming and shouting, maybe they're violent, or maybe, they're like withholding things that they shouldn't be. Maybe they just, whatever, all of these kind of things, right? I think if we haven't been through it personally, we certainly know someone who has close to us, right? Most of us, if not all of us. And so in that case, what's going on there? Because, that's one of the questions, right? Why do people stick in this situation? And there's extreme versions, like there's the pimp and prostitute thing is an example, right? Like one is very predatory towards the other. There's the cult leader and followers, one is very predatory towards the other, in a, I would say, pretty obvious way. So what's going on there, and why do people go along with it? And there's all kinds of explanations that can be given, right? Like once you're in, it can often be difficult to get out. So there's a lot of fear, a lot of, like I put everything into this, like, what will I be left with? I wouldn't know myself without it, all that kind of stuff. So, okay, why don't they get out? It's difficult to get out. Okay. But why do they get into it in the first place? Why do they not leave at the first war? Like, everyone can be tricked, right? And everyone, once they're really, really deep into it, it's difficult to get out. So we can acknowledge both of those things. But my question is more, why, when the first and second, and when they're not that deep into it yet, warning signs come up, do they ignore them? And again, I've fallen for this too. I'm trying to say this in third person to not, single out anyone particularly, but I'm not claiming I'm above this at all. And I think I've talked about it in previous episodes how I have fallen for this stuff. So why do they ignore them? It's almost always because we are switch to collective we, because we are operating in a hypnotic trance, and the person will use words. Right? So let's say, they steal from us. Like, oh, I didn't mean to. Oh, I really needed it. Oh, I thought it would be okay. Whatever, right? Okay. Or the person hurts us, right? Let's not say with words for now. Let's say it's actually something physical, right? They push us, they shove us, they slap us, they punch us, whatever. Or let's say they betray us, right? They say they're going to do something, they don't do it, and that's a significant thing, or they say that they will and they won't, whatever. But again, I don't want it to just be about hurt feelings of words. I want to talk about something that has real life consequences. Maybe they stole money from you, maybe they supported someone else to steal money from you, or something from you. Something real, not just words. Because that often happens. Well, that always happens eventually in these kinds. So when it does, why do we not say, okay, that's it? Because of words, right? They'll say, oh, I love you, I need you, you need me, like all of that kind of thing. It will be a bunch of words, and we will be hypnotized by those words into ignoring the evidence of our own senses. Well, it's ignoring our own bruises, into ignoring our own empty bank account or empty house, ignoring our lost job, ignoring our missed out on promotion, ignoring our whatever, ignoring our, now our child doesn't speak to us anymore because this person lied about us to them, or something like that, right? Again, not just words that they said to us, but something that has real life consequences that are significant. We'll ignore that real life actual evidence and prioritize the words they say to us. And of course, the stereotypical example of this is, the person is not only, men beating women. There's plenty of evidence that it's the other way around. Obviously, men tend to be physically stronger, so it's more impactful when they are violent. But there is plenty of examples of women being violent towards men as well. And in either case, it is it's almost certainly that the person accepted the words and ignored the reality, right? So that's only one example, but why does that happen? And I'm saying that to kind of personalize it for people, because I've been speaking quite theoretically up until now. So think for yourself, either in your own experience, or maybe if you were raised very well and quite lucky it's never happened to you, but then think about someone else, like, why has that happened, right? And maybe it's not as let's say someone tricked you, right? They defrauded you. They say they're going to provide you something in exchange for something, and they don't do it. Now, again, first time, we can all make a mistake, but has that ever happened and you gave the person another chance? Think about that, right? What happened there? Again, it would have been that the words that they gave you, you decided were more important than the reality of the way they actually behave towards you. So why do we have that tendency? And the reason is, and this is, and again, I'll give the kind of philosophical, spiritual, stroke religious kind of interpretation first, because it's easier to understand, then we'll go into some of the science of it, that most of us spend most of the time in the trance state. And so what does it mean to be in a trance state? We've probably heard that term. It comes from hypnosis. So what is hypnosis, right? If we think about someone who's very easily hypnotized, what do we think of? Like a stage magician, and maybe they'll say to the person, you're a dog, crawl around like a dog and bark or something like that, and the person will do it, right? So what's going on there? Assuming the person isn't just consciously playing along, which I think might be the case sometimes, because sometimes people just really love attention, even if it's humiliating in nature. But definitely in reality, sometimes people afterwards like, what happened, right? They have no idea. And so what happened there? They were put into a deeper level of trance. As I put into, the hypnosis kind of community would say, no one does anything they don't really want to. That's debatable. Let's put it mildly. But people could definitely be tricked into doing things. I remember Richard Bandler, a famous NLP and hypnosis teacher, talked about this. He said, you can't hypnotize someone into, say, stabbing someone who they don't want to stab, but you can hypnotize someone into holding a knife up and then dropping it. And if they're not aware that there's a human being there, then they still done it. They just didn't realize that was the consequence of that action, right? And bear in mind, this was a pro-hypnotism, hypnotism is safe and we're not controlling you person saying this. So that's admitted by him. Now, if you get into other things like MK Ultra, which is not a conspiracy theory, this is documented and proven to be a thing. I think the conspiracy theory is whether it's still going on or not, but certainly in the 60s and 70s, there was extensive practical research into the degree to which people can be mind controlled. And, if you look into it, it's pretty shocking. But there is also a case of some people are more susceptible than others. But everyone is susceptible to some degree to hypnosis. Here's another bit of evidence for you. And again, we will not claim for a second I'm superior to this. Can you watch a horror movie or a thriller or whatever it might be without getting any emotional response? The answer is almost certainly no. But think about what the objective reality is. The objective reality is that a bunch of people were paid to go and pretend that stuff was happening. A bunch of people were paid to film it and record it and edit it and all the rest of it. And then at some point later, you're in a room where none of that is going on. There's a bunch of flashing colorful lights on the screen, and there is a bunch of sounds going on. You are not in any physical danger. And none of that is real. And it was never real. It was always play pretend. And you know that. And that same actor that's now scaring you, you might have seen in a different thing and they made you laugh. But it still scares you, even though you know it's not real. You know it's not true. You know it poses no threat to you. Why does it still scare you? And I know there's always there'll be someone, horror movies never scare me. Okay. Why does the comedy make you laugh? Again, it's not happening to you right now, or why does the drama or the thriller make you engaged? Or why does the drama make you cry? It's all the same thing. Why are you crying? It's pretend. It's not even real, right? So why? Because you're able to go into a trance. And that kind of segues into the other thing, because although it's generally considered as a design fault in this kind of line of thinking, this philosophy that I'm sharing, there are some advantages to this, right? So there is an advantage to being able to be in a trance state. And obviously this is where there's such a thing as hypnosis as a therapeutic tool, right? You can actually, because you are so suggestible, you can have someone give you a bunch of suggestions which make you happy, which make you more competent, which make you more confident, which make you more resourceful, decisive, even intelligent, to stop bad habits like smoking. Some people say they can make your breasts grow or your brain grow, or all this kind of stuff. Like, it's amazing what you can be suggested into, which is actually potentially benefiting you. And so I think the important thing to understand is what I'm sharing now. A lot of powerful people are actually aware of it, and so there's kind of, I would say, at least three different schools of people who are aware of this. Number one are the predators. So they're aware of it, and they use it to increase their power and to extract resources from you. This could be anything from a cult leader to a dictator, but it could even be a marketing professional. Anyone who understands this element of human nature well and uses it for their own benefit, without any concern to your benefit. There's obviously the potential for a win-win situation, which we'll cover for a sec. But if they don't care about the win-win, if they only care about their own win and anything else is up to you, I'd call that predatory. Even if they're not actively harming you, if they don't care about you and they're extracting resources from you because they understand how easy you are to manipulate and control, then that's a predatory mindset. As I say, you'll find these people commonly in politics. You'll find them in education. You'll find them in big business, often when there's ties to government, I would say, but not necessarily. You'll find them in religion. You'll find them in so-called spirituality. You'll find them wherever a small minority of human beings have power and sway and influence, and especially control over others, and especially are able to get a lot of resources out of others. So is it always predatory when it's going on? No. And this is where people go a little bit too far. It's predatory if they don't care about you and all they care about is their power and getting resources from you. The second class is what I would call the shepherds. So there's like the wolves and the shepherds. So the shepherds, they understand this tendency of humanity, but they care, just like a shepherd cares about their flock. Now, this kind of criticism of the shepherds, maybe ultimately they're planning to kill the sheep, but let's say it's a nice shepherd, all he does is shear your wool, but otherwise he keeps you safe and he feeds you and all the rest of it, right? So overall, let's say it's a mutually beneficial relationship. And maybe he also tends to if you're ill and blah, blah, blah. The traditional shepherd, and this is where the concept of Jesus was a shepherd. Shepherd these days, I don't think is considered extremely high status, but back in 2,000 years ago, wool was a lot more valuable because we hadn't come up with modern textiles yet, and clothing was quite a rare thing and quite an expensive thing. And so if you were a shepherd, it meant you were, first of all, it was not a weak thing. Like you might be fending off wolves and lions to protect your sheep, so it was a strong thing. And then second of all, it was a high status thing because the sheep were valuable. And then third of all, it was a loving kind of protective thing because you were actually looking after the sheep and you probably deeply cared about them. Some shepherds would have a lot deeper connections with their sheep than with human beings, like it was, that kind of level. They maybe the way some people still feel about horses, like that's how the shepherd would often feel about their sheep. They really cared about them. So the shepherd's idea was understanding how human beings are, but and I'm not accusing Christianity or Jesus of this, that's where the analogy maybe ends, but what I call the shepherds is understanding this is how humans are and thinking that probably they're not going to snap out of it, and so we just need to protect them and look after them. So these are kind of the good guys compared to the predators, but depending on your perspective, because you could say there's a lot of maybe arrogance in this perspective of feeling like, I have realized the truth, but you are not capable of it. So I need to look after you and make decisions for you because you're not capable of making it itself because you are uneducated and you are this and you are that. So there's a certain potential, despite all the things I just said about how a shepherd can be a good thing, there's the potential for not the predatory I don't care about you abuse, but more the I know what's good for you better than you do type of abuse with the shepherd. And then there is the third level, and these are often, I don't have a good word for them, but these are the rebels, the awakeners, and their view is, no, I have an awakening, and I am determined to help people wake up and to help other people wake up, and I am not willing to be in either of those two roles. I'm not willing to use my insight to abuse and exploit, and I'm also not willing to fall into the trap of like pride and superiority and feeling that I know better than others what they need than they do, right? Now, you don't have to believe anything I'm saying, but just think hypothetically, if most people are in a state of trance and really don't know what's true most of the time, and you, by some miracle, are not or are significantly less so, you can imagine that's quite difficult to be that third person. It's quite easy to fall into the trap of I know better than you if you're, if you have a conscience and you're a good person. And it's even quite easy eventually to get weary of people constantly doing things that are self-sabotaging and self-destructive and go into being a full-on predator and like, oh, if these people don't care about their own well-being, why should I? Kind of thing, right? So again, we should try and have compassion and empathy for everyone's position. And actually, you often find, and this is a criticism that's often made of politicians, right? They used to be so idealistic and they seemed to genuinely care and they genuinely wanted to change things, and then they got into office and then they just they just enriched themselves and built their own power and didn't really do anything to help people. And so some of them, maybe most of them, that was their plan all along. They were just lying to get elected or to get into that position, let's say, if wasn't an election involved. But not necessarily all of them. And some of them may have been, and I'm saying, if they get into a position of power, because you have to, anyone in a position of power understands what I'm saying to some degree. Because you can't, it's very, very unusual that people have the natural skill of it, because of being influential enough to accrue significant power and significant resource without understanding this. Because of the fact that most of us are in a state of trance most of the time, and we're constantly making decisions and we're constantly kind of self-sabotaging and self-destructing without realizing it, because we're constantly operating on faulty premises and faulty perceptions. And so you don't get into a really good, if you're born into it maybe, but there are plenty of people who are born into very powerful families, wealthy families, who still have crashed and burned and ended up destitute and all the rest of it. Like it's no guarantee, no matter what your starting position, that you will end up with a lot of power and resources and influence, unless you understand. Now obviously, if you're born into a family and they all understand it, they teach it to you, you are more likely to understand it. And that is the accusation that's made about some of these famous families going back many generations and many centuries, that they either they have this predatory mindset or they have this shepherd mindset, and they do consider themselves above the rest of humanity, and maybe they think they're helping, maybe they don't care, so yeah, you're more likely maybe to have this understanding if you're born into a certain position. But I'm saying being born into a position doesn't guarantee you anything, and that's why people often still crash and burn. And some people, I've kind of given three options now, but the fourth option of people who realize all this is destruction. So they may end up destitute, they may end up in an insane asylum. The impact of realizing all this stuff is too much for them, and they can't handle it, and they don't want to handle it. And so, people sometimes talk about alpha and stuff like that. So I'd say probably the shepherd corresponds to the alpha. They're the ones who are like in charge of the group. They know better what the group needs, and so they're the leader. Then there's the sigma. So they're the ones who are outside of society. They're outside of the group, but they have a level of autonomy, and they don't need the group, because when you're in a state of trance, most of the time when you are so disconnected from what's real, you have to go with consensus reality. You have to go with whatever the group is doing. And that's like the sheep-like behavior, right? The lemming-like behavior. If everyone else is doing it, I'll do it too. Just a simple example, right? Like if there's a noise, I watch everyone turn like that. And I often don't do it because because I just don't want to go along with the group. I don't want to do what everyone else is doing just because they're doing it.
It's good practice.
Just because it's practice, right?
Yeah.
And if it was because the bus is careening towards us, everyone else has already turned around and looked, and so they would start running, then I would look, right? But I'm not going to, I try not to act in that collectivist reflexive way, as you just said, as a matter of practice, as a matter of principle, as much.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your Genetic Insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code REJUVENATE to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code REJUVENATE to get 20% off today. It's a good thing because sometimes as well, like people just start forming a queue because they think that's where the queue or line, starts. Yep. And then they just get in there. And then suddenly they realize they're not even in anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So like not just going along and questioning would be an example. Now, doing the opposite of what everyone does just for the sake of it is just a different type of being asleep. I'm not talking about that. That's because that's a different type of reaction. There's the reaction of following and the reaction of going against. So maybe that example I just gave, as I said, I would turn around if I thought it was an actual thing, but I don't just turn around because I see everyone else is. I guess that's the point that I was trying to make there. So I'm giving lots of kind of examples and skating around it because I kind of want to make it practical. But if we get to the core of it, the idea is that most of us now, why are we this way? There's a lot of interpretations to this. The materialists will just say it's because of evolution, the way that we've developed. For example, we have a lot more, as a default anyway, we have a lot more command and control connections from the reptilian part of the brain to the prefrontal cortex than vice versa. So what does that mean? Our instincts are much more able to control our conscious mind than our conscious mind is able to control our instincts. So that, if you're a materialist, then you believe, like evolution without any without creationism, I guess, or without outside influence, then you believe that that's just how we happenstantially have happened to develop. And from an evolutionary point of view, humans are a curious creature. We have these really big heads that barely fit through a woman's hips, and so because of that, we're born helpless more than any other animal, and we stay helpless for much longer than any other animal by far. Most other, even mammals, are able to get up and walk within a few minutes to hours of waking up. We need a year. So that keeps us in an incredibly vulnerable position for an incredibly long time. And so it leaves us, and all of this is because of the size of the head. This is the more materialistic theory. So to have the big brains that really set humans apart and give us such an edge, like over all other animals on Earth in many ways, it takes a lot to develop that, and it basically means we're in a very vulnerable position for a very long time compared to any other animal. And so because of that, we end up in a very because of that intense vulnerability, we are very dependent on others for a very long time. And so we habitually, so beyond the neurochemistry, which is what I started with, we are very used to taking cues from others as to what's what, you know? So a 6-month-old baby is entirely dependent still on the mother or the primary caregiver to know anything about reality, whereas a 6 months old deer, it's already largely, as much as it's capable with the size of its brain, operating, yes, from instinct and yes, from social programming, but still fundamentally it's responding to the reality of the situation within those frameworks and limitations. It's not in a state of complete trance in the same way because of that different upbringing. That's the idea. And so I remember a comedian I like, Bill Hicks, he talked about this, how, you can never persuade like a puppy to drink Coca-Cola because it's going to, help it get laid more. But you can easily do it to a human, with like an advertisement. Like it's only humans that will like literally drink something poisonous because they can be hypnotized and convinced that it will get them something, whereas any other animal is just like, ugh, that's horrible. Like, you know what I mean? Like humans are the most able to go against their own instincts. Now, this both gives us a massive advantage potentially over other animals and other mammals if it is done in an intelligent way based on a accurate reading of objective reality. But obviously also it's potentially an incredible liability if it makes us do things which are against our own interest, both individually and collectively, either because we're being exploited or misled or manipulated, which is kind of what I focused on a lot so far, but also just because we are collectively wrong. This is another thing. And this is where we're a bit more similar to to other animals. A lot of animals. There's an example, for instance, about again from Robert Anton Wilson. I remember it talks about like a baby duck. If when it comes out of the egg, it sees like a toy, it imprints on that, and it thinks that that's its mother, and it starts trying to suckle it, and if the toy moves, follow it, and all the rest of it, and it can even do it with humans. But now here's the crazy thing: it could do it with a cat. You might want to, kill it and eat it or whatever, right? And so we talk about a lot about the wisdom of nature and the wisdom of animals. I think what's being talked about with that is, yes, they are not anywhere near as easily hypnotized to do things that are self-destructive as us human beings are. Dogs we kind of highly prize because of the level that we are able to condition them. We can brainwash them a bit to do things against their own interests, but most other mammals, including cats to a much larger degree, like we can't, right? They if they don't want to do it, they just won't do it. And that's most animals. Yeah, there's dogs, there's horses, there's parrots, there's a handful that we can train a bit, but yeah, not many. But so we talk about the wisdom of animals, and I think that's part of where it's true that they are less in a trance than humans and less easily misled and manipulated, but they are still, they have their own things where they can make massive mistakes. And this issue of imprinting would be one significant example of that. And the thing is, imprinting happens for human beings as well. And that's actually the book I mentioned at the start by Robert Anton Wilson, Prometheus Rising specifically. That's what the book is about, the idea that we have 8 imprints, and that when those imprints take effect, they make a big impact on us, and then everything that we see is through that lens. In the same way that a duck, if they're born, next to a cat, and that's what the first thing they see, then they're going to follow the cat around as if it's the mother, which may or may not be a mistake, depending on how hungry and how aggressive that cat is. It will determine how big a mistake that is, but it's definitely a mistake to some degree because that cat has not got the food necessary to nurture that duck, right? So it's definitely a mistake to some degree. And so, I guess my point is all animals, all mammals are subject to making these mistakes about objective reality. Humans aren't the only ones. But humans are the ones who take it the furthest because they don't just have this issue with, imprinting and having too small a brain to maybe pass information, they also have this ability to imagine. And they also have this ability to remember in a complex way. And so this is the other thing. This is talked about by a lot of spiritual teachers. I guess Eckhart Tolle might be the most prominent modern example of this, about how most of us are and so Eckhart Tolle would be a great example actually of a more modern, very popular example of really the same principle of what I'm talking about here. He doesn't use quite the same words, but what he says is most people are living in their imagination and their memory. So, and specifically listening to the voice in their head, right? Not listening, I guess the most important thing is focusing on the voice in the head. And so he, talks about what's the process of awakening. The process of awakening, I think The Power of Now, right? That's the first book. He talks about the process of awakening as stop listening to the voice in your head, stop believing it, stop trusting it, stop treating it as if it's you, right? And start becoming more aware of the present moment. So spend less time thinking about the past, less time thinking about the future, usually called memory and imagination, and less time focused on the voice in your head, and maybe also images and other stuff in your head. Start focusing more on the present moment. And there's all kinds of techniques for that. I'll get into those more later, but, he talks about meditation. I guess that's the most well-known thing that he talks about, and of course, many, many others. And yeah, I won't talk about meditation yet. So I want to talk about a little bit more about the problem. So he tried to teach this. He's probably an example of that third type, although I don't know for sure. Maybe he's just trying to get power and whatever. But he seems to be that type who's just like exclusively focused on helping people awaken from what he considered, at least, initially. And then I remember he wrote a second book. And what was the second book? It was basically a long explanation about why it didn't work to almost anyone, right? And he came up with this idea of the pain body, and like that we're addicted to suffering, and we're constantly and there's this kind of thing that keeps pulling us back. It's, again, more than 20 years since I read it, so I'm probably not explaining it very well, but so which is why I won't go into it in much depth. But basically, it's like, first book, just stop focusing on your thoughts and treating it as you, start focusing on the present moment. Second one, longer book, why it's so difficult, right? And all the, how you can overcome that, what you call the pain body and all the rest of it. And it's good. I'm not mocking it. Any system that works is awesome. But to go back to, I don't know if he didn't say it because he didn't see it this way, or because he didn't know how to explain it, or he didn't think it was helpful or whatever. But the truth, which I think is hard to swallow. Remember, we talked earlier about truths are hard to swallow. The amount of crap that's in the things that we consume, the amount of potential danger in every building or every vehicle we go in. Those are the two examples I gave. But there's obviously infinite amount more. It's hard to swallow. It's kind of easy to say that, I want to be more present. It's hard to swallow how easily and constantly manipulated we are, not just into doing certain things, but into believing certain things and even perceiving certain things that aren't even real, that aren't even true, that aren't even there. And so obviously a full-on visual hallucination of the Virgin Mary appearing in front of you as a 3D hologram and maybe speaking to you is a level that's a bit less common as far as we know. But I would say, getting scared about the horror film is a much, or worried about the news, even though it's the opposite side of the world, or it hasn't happened yet, or whatever it might be. Like, these are all examples of where we're reacting as if something is real when it is not, and even when we know it's not. That's the crazy thing. So we have a full-on reaction, and this is measurable. Our heart's racing, the saliva is maybe increasing or drying up, the pupils are dilating. All of these physiological changes are happening in us as a response to nothing real. That's the crucial point to understand. And so I talked about a horror movie, and obviously a horror movie, like it's trying to be a 3D immersive experience to pull you in, right? So it's sounds, maybe on a big screen. You've got sights on a big screen. You've got three-dimensional sounds all around you. And so there we could say, okay, we know it's actors and all the rest of it, but still, it's like it's a big three-dimensional thing with the two most important senses to really drag you into it. You can kind of forgive people, you can forgive yourself to getting caught up to some degree. But here's the crazy thing, and this is one of the reasons I like stand-up comedy, like it's interesting that, especially these days with people's attention spans, right? Like they say the movies have to have bigger and bigger special effects and more, everything to keep people engaged, otherwise people lose interest. But a stand-up comedian is able to make you like sit there and be fully engaged and absorbed and focused on them for an hour, and it's just a person just talking. It's just a person saying words, right? That's interesting to me. And of course, stand-up comedy isn't the only thing. Motivational speaker. If you go to like a Tony Robbins event, everyone's totally into it. And it's 16 hours. It's actually often like longer than most people would even want to be awake. Fully immersed, fully engaged, a pastor at an evangelical church, right? People singing, dancing, maybe they're having exorcisms and speaking in tongues and, all that kind of thing. Like people get really into just a person standing there saying words. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. And I guess the church example, I guess you're surrounded by people all around you again. So maybe but there are people at home having those experiences, just watching or listening to it on the radio. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, although that's less common. Like just hearing a person say words and just reading. All right, let's get even more crazy. Chrissy, have you ever read a book and had feelings?
Totally. Oh my God, I've been in fits of tears of reading a book. Yes.
Me too. I don't think I want to be best. I've been enraged. I've been in tears. I've been in hysterics. That's just a tree that's been turned into really thin sheets and then ink. And then there's just little symbols. And there's you in your bedroom or your living room or wherever you are reading it. And nothing's going on. There's not even any sights like a horror movie. There's not even any sounds. There's not even other feedback like there might be at a motivational seminar or a church or whatever. It's just words on a page. Why are you crying? Why are you furious?
Yeah, no, but exactly. Tell me, Owen. Tell me why.
Because you're in a trance. Because I'm in a trance.
I would go, but I'm grasping trance, but then I'm also going, well, but wait a minute, is that my emotions? Is that what trance? Like I'm trying to piece together in my logical brain where trance and I'm reading the words, but I'm feeling emotions of how I go in between and into that state.
So if we believe this theory, almost all of us, 99 point a certain amount of 9%, are in it almost all the time.
All the time. Right.
However,
that's a state of existence.
Yes. However, it is a question of degrees. So all of us are in different levels of trance at different times. And also, a lot of us have a different baseline. And so that's when we talked about the stage hypnotist earlier, or even like with something like MK Ultra, who are they targeting? The person who is really trying to get you into a very high level of compliance is looking for those who are more susceptible. So what does susceptible mean? More able to go into a deep level of trance and more able to go into a deep level of trance. So same sentence, different words emphasized. It's the ability and the depth, right? And so depth meaning, ability to act to words as if they're real. So if we think about the stage hypnotist for a second, a bit less controversial maybe than MK Ultra, if they're saying, you're a dog now, let me push this leash on you and walk you around. Again, let's assume the person isn't playing along, right? That afterwards they're like, what the hell happened? Like, what happened there? They heard words and they believed it so profoundly, it completely overrode, first of all their objective senses. And second of all, their own, memory of their objective senses, right? And even their, I guess, their projections about their future experience. All of that went away because the impact of the words was so deep and so powerful, it wiped everything else out. Now, you said you were crying in the book. Have you ever been doing that and someone walked in and you were suddenly embarrassed, or not embarrassed, but you realize
yeah, it's kind of oh, wait a minute. Hi, this is okay. Yeah. Okay. I've got to do that thing. Right. Yeah.
Not that you should be embarrassed for crying. It'd be the same as laughing, right? If
Yeah.
I'm I read Doug Stanhope's biography a while ago. Hilarious, My wife walked in and was why are you cackling to yourself? I'm oh yeah, it's just a bit weird to be sitting there on your own, having any intense emotion for absolutely no real reason.
No, yeah, because you've sort of been caught out, I guess, of oh, you're in your own world, maybe in a way. And yeah.
In your own world. That's it. So you say, and you asked, is it the same as disassociation, which was a great question. And I said, I think my answer was at the extremes, right? So yes. And so when it's at the extremes, it's more noticeable. But even then, it's not noticeable these days because we're blind to it, because culturally it's considered to be normal. We have to realize how much of what we consider normal now was completely alien and unusual relatively recently and throughout most of our evolution and recorded history as far as we know. So never mind the fact that, we've now got a phone that will talk to us as if it's a real human with AI, on it. Even a book. Books were illegal until recently. It's kind of crazy, for a lot of Christians to think now, but throughout most of Christianity, if you read the Bible in the only language you knew, you could be burned at the stake for heresy. If you read the Bible, the very thing that's supposed to be the word of God that you're supposed to be following along with, now that seems crazy to us, right? You're laughing. But that's because until recently, it was considered that only the priest class had the wisdom to be able to read. That only they were able to slip into a trance without getting it wrong. That was the basic. And I'm not trying to justify the burnings and all the rest of it, but the idea was, look, you're a normal person, you don't know anything, and you start reading Revelation. You might be all whatever, right? You might be freaked out. You might start your own cult, all this kind of stuff. That's too much responsibility for you. We'll take care of that. We're trained to read. You don't worry about reading. Now, it seems crazy now these days, we're getting a bit of that again, right? The idea of doing your own research is being mocked, right? About certain things. And we're being told, just listen to the experts, trust the experts. If you're doing your own reading, if you're doing your own research, then you're considered to be an idiot because you should just be listening to trusted authorities. This is obviously not a new trend. This has been going on throughout history. I just gave an example of, a certain way it was going on for a very long time. But, this is a common thought. So actually, I guess the point I'm making is, the idea that suddenly we're not supposed to do our own research anymore and we're meant to trust the science or whatever they're saying. That's actually the default state of how things normally are in a culture and a civilization. And the idea that you had access to music and plays and books and words and all the rest of it, anything, obviously people were communicating with each other with words, but that was pretty much it. And if you get a bunch of people who've never read a book, never seen a play, never heard music other than maybe the one that's prescribed by local things, never heard a view of anything beyond the material world other than the same one that everyone else around you has heard and every ancestor that you have any connection with has heard. If you have all of that, you're still in a trance, but the trance you're in is very, very harmonized with everyone else's trance relatively. Now, of course, there's still conflict, and this is where there was a lot of conflict. So, the Christians and the Vikings, right? The Vikings came along, they were in a very different trance about what was real, what was right, fundamentally different morality. And Viking thing, you went to heaven if you were courageous enough, no matter how many people you cruelly killed, Christian thing wasn't quite like that. They had a different morality, right? You went to heaven if you forgave enough. It's a very different way of looking at what isn't right, what isn't real, even, right? It's beyond even what's right. It's what's real. To them, Valhalla was real, and the only way you got there is you died in battle during, doing something courageous. With the Christian culture, again, the only way you get to heaven is if you are virtuous enough, and that was defined by qualities more like forgiveness and charity and temperance and all the rest of it. Humility, I guess, being the primary one. Very different, and so there would be conflict, but it would be between these collective agreed upon trance states. Whereas now, we have access to so many different trance states. It's extremely confusing to most people, and it's why I think there's more chaos in many ways. So I was saying earlier how I'd say overall, despite all the things I know are worse that I talk about in the podcast, objectively, most of us are in a better position than we were 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. But it doesn't feel like it, and it actually isn't the case in reality, because our subjective inputs as these creatures, which are highly susceptible to different levels of trance, has become so overwhelming, so confusing. As much as we are now open to and have the possibility of awakening, you could go your whole life and never hear of these concepts I'm saying now, way more commonly in the past, I believe. Again, depending where you were and all the rest of it when you were, but still, these days, anyone has potential access to these ideas, but they're also potentially, everyone has 1,000 or 1,000,000 more predators that are able to act upon them. They have 1,000 or more, 1,000,000 more shepherds who want to take control of them and tell them what's best, and maybe look after their best interest, maybe not, depending on your own beliefs around that. But we're susceptible to we are susceptible to trance in general, and we are susceptible to so much more input from all these different sources, and it is really confusing us and scrambling us to a very large degree. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be breaking us out of the trance. It seems to be embedding us deeper and deeper in a trance, because remember what we talked about earlier, reality is scary in most cases. Now, ironically, the people who genuinely awaken are actually the least fearful, because here's the thing. Okay, when you awaken, maybe you're more aware of everything wrong, but you also become aware of some other very important facts. Like, for instance, that what you truly are is incapable of being harmed in any way. That's the interesting thing, because your body can be harmed, your mind can be harmed, your emotions can be harmed, even like your psyche can be harmed. You can definitely be disconnected from your spirit or your soul, so that's a type of harm if you believe in such a thing. But the fundamental, what you really ultimately are, cannot be harmed. And so the people who are truly in this state, who really understand this at the deepest level, which is beyond the people who are predators, beyond the people who are shepherds, and beyond many of the people who are rebels, who are first waking up and trying to help other people to do it. But if you're really a long way there, then you remember at all times that all of this is temporary, and none of this is really truly me, and so therefore there's nothing to fear. And that's something you can see in Christianity, and you can see in every major world religion, every major philosophical system, every major spiritual system. If it is genuine, if it is real, that there will be certain people, often but not always, the figureheads of those different organizations, who got this. And that was, I guess, the point of Christianity, which I guess is the dominant religion where we operate. That was Jesus dying on the cross, and he was able to remember, even in that terrible moment of emotional betrayal and physical pain and everything bad, that this isn't real. That what's really real, who I really am, is not hurtable by these things, by this situation, by even all the subjective reality. So a lot of people who are in a trance state, though, try and skip to that, and they never want to deal with objective reality. They want to go from being in a trance to this spiritual awakening, and that is not real. It is just another level of trance. There's a difference between being in a trance of, maybe I'm a victim and I'm this and I'm that. There's a different trance of I'm an enlightened being, but those are just different trances. Maybe one is better than the other. But being in a trance of I'm an enlightened being, I've seen a lot of people in that trance. They keep butting their heads against the reality that they're not, because it's not actually true, and so they often have a lot of problems. And so it's not that simple. But if you can expand to, okay, I'm aware of objective reality, right? What's that? The table in front of me, the camera, the lights, this chair, the earth. So all the actual objective material reality. But then actually there's more that is objective reality. There's also an objective reality of something beyond that. And it's did you exist before you were born? Do you still exist after you die? Where do you go when you're asleep? All this kind of all these kind of questions, they are impossible to answer accurately while you're in a state of trance. In the same way that while you're in a state of trance, it's impossible to tell if subatomic particles are really photons or particles. Those are both just measuring equipments that are inadequate to fully comprehend the full spectrum of what it is that they're viewing. And so depending on the limitations of their own detection, they tell you what they see. But it's the limits of detection that's the problem. So fake spirituality or religiosity, whatever you want to call it, which unfortunately is the vast majority, is just people going from one trance to another trance. But the real thing, if it exists, is to be fully aware, or much more fully aware, of objective reality by being less in a trance and then becoming aware of, actually there is something more. Actually, it doesn't make sense. Like, if the universe is finite, then what's beyond it, right? This is a great question. Did you ponder this at some point as a kid, Chrissy? What's at the end of the universe, or what's beyond the universe?
No, I think more so with latter years, but it's
Okay.
kind of yeah.
And then what's beyond it in terms of space, and then what's beyond it in terms of time, right? This is a really hard thing to comprehend. And so, and a lot of, what do they say? Oh, it's a paradox, or it's ineffable. Physics tries to give answers, but none of them are satisfactory.
No.
Right? And the reason they're not satisfactory, well, let me ask you if you can guess what I'm going to say. Obviously, I'm not certain I'm right, but why would you say, based on this whole conversation, why I would say the reason that they're unsatisfactory?
Well, there is no objective reality within that. None of us actually know.
Well, none of us actually know, but why is the question unanswerable? Or why isn't a good answer to the question? Let's put it that way.
Well, because we're all going to believe what we're going to believe about it anyway. So that there's just no... Yeah, I'm doing a horrible job here.
Well, that's the subjectivist perspective,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I would say the problem is those are labels. Universe is a label. End is a label. Time is a label. Infinity is a label. They are all just words. And so the reason why there's no answer to them is because they are just words. Just like we can't tell if a subatomic thing or not thing is a particle or a wave. I think it's wave, not photon. The reason we can't tell if it's a particle or a wave, and depending on what we measure it will tell us something different, is because those instruments are inadequate to grasp the full scope of what they are perceiving. Our instruments, and especially our words are instruments. Our words are incapable of grasping the full scope of what we are perceiving. And so that's why when we say, that's why, eternity or infinity, which is an unendingness applied to time and space is so hard to understand, because it shows the limits of our instruments to comprehend the objective reality that we're faced with right now, because it is beyond being able. But we don't want to fall into the trap, in my opinion, which is the obvious default trap, which, yes, you just did with that answer, of it's because nothing's real, or we can never know. Maybe we can never know, because again, we don't know, but we don't know that for sure. Maybe we can. Maybe if we snap out of our trance of acting like words are more real than reality, we can perceive the truth. We can perceive the answers to these questions. The only problem is then, can we convey them to anyone else when we're limited to words to explain them, which are inadequate to, and that's the problem often identified by a lot of mystics, philosophers, any of these people who have, broached this and maybe actually come to a realization. First of all, they may be wrong. Maybe they were just in another level of trance. But second of all, maybe they really did get it, but then they can't explain it to me or you. Because
No, exactly. And they can never know if we're in an objective reality or if we're in a trance either. Like, we can't know where somebody else is at.
I disagree with that too. You can by seeing how they respond to labels. If they respond to labels as if they are more real than reality, they're in a trance.
Okay.
Unless they are really pretending, and you could say, okay, maybe they are fully awake and they're pretending and going along. So I guess, all right, then you're right. but the vast majority of the time, it's pretty easy. And it's by this. And of course, there's levels to it. And this is why I was saying about, this is not binary. This is not, I'm not in a trance, you are, or we're not in a trance, or whatever. This is the level of it. And so just to kind of talk about culture for a second, and then we'll go into practical, because I realize we've gone too long already. As I say, we're now seeing, like when I was a kid, same when you are, saying sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, right? And there's a truth to that in an objective sense, right? You can break someone's bones with sticks and stones. The hurt that comes from words is a choice. It's always, right? It doesn't have to happen. So for instance, if I said to you, Chrissy, I'm going to kill you, you would not be hurt by that, because you know I do not mean it, right? They are just words to you. But if a certain person said it in a different context, you may be hurt by it, right? And the reason that you would be hurt by it is because you felt, maybe you didn't even think they meant it, but in the case of me just saying it to you just there, you knew I was saying it just as an example. Maybe if someone else said it to you, you may not believe they're going to follow through on it, although you may have a tiny bit of doubt. But more importantly, you're going to be hurt just with the fact that they'd say something like that to you, right? So you're probably going to be hurt by it in certain contexts. Some people receive death threats all day long, and they have to get used to it. Often prominent, big, powerful, influential, popular people, and they have to learn to still be able to sleep at night. They have to learn that those are only words. You get your first death threat, I'm sure it's very scary. You get your 10,000th, you're like, well, I'm still here. No one's ever tried anything, or maybe the one time they did, my security took care of it. They're just words, So you go from there's that whole spectrum. And so the thing that's concerning to me is, especially in some countries, is they're codifying into law that, like, hurting someone's feelings by saying words is a crime. And often it's treated even as a worse crime than actual real bodily harm that requires hospitalization. And this to me is a symptom of not the fact that whoever decided to make these laws did it, because tyrants have been trying it on throughout history and will probably continue throughout the rest of human civilization. That's always been the case. What's concerning to me is the amount of people like, yeah, fair enough. Like, as if that's a normal thing, to treat a word as if it is anywhere in the same universe of level of problem as an actual physical action. Now, you can say some words lead to physical actions, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, because you do have things and degrees where, there are stalking issues. There are things where
But
people
that's a
actually
physical action.
Yes, but the stalker, let's call that, has an intent behind it, or they're sending, threats or things like that, which are the words. But that, there's, I
Well,
understand where you,
I just gave the
yeah,
death threats example, right?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I understand, but what matters is not the words. What matters is the intent behind them, if it's actually real. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, yes, I do. I do
And
understand
so
that.
there's always been that distinction until recently, that, like, if I say something highly offensive to you, but we're friends and we're joking, then it's fine. But if I say something highly offensive to you and I don't know you, and within the context it's an actual threat, then that's different. Like, I understand that. But I still would say, though a threat of violence that is real or could be real is serious and should be treated with seriousness, and I actually am against it when it is not sometimes, it's still not as bad as the act itself. Do you understand what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I see the distinction.
Yeah, and so but we're starting to act as if it is. And then we're going way beyond that. Like, in some places, the standard for whether something is an offense or not in the law is if someone feels offended. So it no longer is about the intent, is no longer about even if it actually leads to anything real in the physical world. It is purely about the subjective emotional reaction of the person. And so that is where I think we're in very dangerous territory.
Yeah, I see where you are with that, because there can be a very slippery slope.
Absolutely. It means, because and so this, unfortunately, the nature of tyranny is to have everyone be a criminal. You want every single citizen or person within your domain to be committing crimes, and then you can only focus on the ones that you want to target. So the optimal situation for a tyranny is actually not that everyone is good and complying with every law and every regulation, because in that situation, if a person says, I am good, I'm a good citizen, I'm a good whatever, they start to get ideas that they have rights. And it's only if every single person believes that they are guilty and that they are a criminal, either genuinely or simply under the eyes of the law, even though the law may not be just, as in the case of the laws I'm discussing here, then everyone knows that they have to comply, and they have to not do things that actually threaten the power of the tyranny, or they will be treated harshly, and the excuse is already built in. Do you understand what I mean? So if there are no laws against what you do as a normal human being, then they have to kind of frame you, right? If they want to take you down, they have to make something up. But if people behaving normally is criminal, then any enemy of the tyranny can automatically be persecuted, silenced, imprisoned, whatever it might be, with no other justification or pretext. And the easiest way to do that is to persuade enough people that normal human behavior, which is just saying things you don't mean, is criminal. Because not everyone goes around physically attacking people, thank God. But everyone does go around saying things that someone might perceive as hurtful at some point. And if they don't, it's because they are extremely mentally enslaved. And even then, I've known people who all they want to do is be liked, all they want to do is please everyone around them, and they still manage to upset people some of the time, right?
Well,
Or even a
yeah,
lot
of
of the
course.
time. Like, that's just life. So you're going to upset and offend people some of the time, even if you spend your whole life tiptoeing around trying not to. And so that's the problem. It makes everyone a criminal, which means that everyone, and when everyone's a criminal, not everyone's going to end up arrested, not everyone's going to end up in jail. So who does? The people who are a threat to the actual people who have power, largely. And so that's the way that it works. And so that's why it's so important. Now, as I said, the reasons for it may or may not be nefarious. I don't even know. I don't know if the people pushing these laws are so deep in this state of trance that they believe this themselves, that they believe that words are more important than, or at least equal to, actual physical violence, which has real objective world outcomes. But I think at least some people involved genuinely believe it. I wouldn't be surprised if most of the people involved genuinely believe it, and there's just a few people who are cynically exploiting it in order to, increase their power and increase their control. And that's what worries me. And so that's why I want to talk about it and say to, everyone listening, like, don't fall for this on a societal, cultural level, but then also don't fall for it within yourself individually. I remember, like a friend of mine, it was 10 years ago or something, and I think you met him, Chrissy, and he said something like, I find this quite offensive, actually. And I said to him, really? And it wasn't what he was offended about. I have no idea what it was. But what I said is, I find being offensive is like a sign of like low moral character, personally. Like being because of, I hope that makes sense now, I'm saying this right at the end, like, because it means that you are in such a trance state that you're having emotional reactions. And again, this wasn't something someone said to him. This is just something someone said to someone else or something. He wasn't even involved. And it's like, you're so reactive that you're having painful feelings that are probably causing unpleasant chemical reactions in your body based on words, like that someone said to someone. And who knows, quite often both people involved are just narcissists, both trying to get attention. It's like what? Like, this is not a sign of virtue to be offended by things in almost every circumstance. It's a sign of virtue to protect someone that, trying to hurt you or trying to hurt someone you love. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying everyone should just be able to get away with everything, but I am saying, like, most things are none of our business, right? Like interactions between certainly two complete strangers, right? And there is no reason to feel personally upset by them other than that you're deep in a trance. That's another way to tell that that's really what's going on.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Owen Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code REJUVENATE to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code REJUVENATE for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. Yeah, okay. It's landing. It's also, too, it's that thing of, as you go through your day, or now as we're coming to the close of this episode, it's like, for me, checking in and figuring out, where am I? Am I in a trance? How deep of a trance am I in? Or am I in the now, and am I in that objective space? And just checking that out, because there will be times where I will have done something and go, oh wait, what was I just doing? I'm not even aware of the present reality because I'm so out there in that thought or in that dimension.
So there's like an advanced level, but then there's an intermediate level. So let's talk about just the beginner's level even. So let's talk about the difference. So an advanced level might be that a loved one, no matter what they say to you, you're not angry, you're not hurt, you're not afraid, you're not whatever, because you love them and you have compassion for them and you understand that they're probably just reacting to something. And even if they are responding to your own actions, you're just dealing with it constructively, right? That's advanced level. That's pretty hard for anyone to get to. But what about just a beginner level? Have you ever been in a situation where someone said something and you've become really upset, some version of upset, and then you realize you didn't even understand them correctly? Like you misread it, you misheard it, you know, maybe, they said they're going to do something and they say, or not do something, whatever. And then you say, did you do it? And they say, I have, and they say, I have, and you think that they said, I haven't, right? And you're like, oh, you said you, and then they're like, no, I just said, like, I've been in that position before, totally, many times. So that's super reactive, right? So again, the other one of just always being present and wise and compassionate and appropriate responding, that may be pretty difficult, although it's great to aim for it, but at least responding to what's actually happening rather than responding to something that hasn't even happened, that would be a good starting place to aim for, right? That would be a good benchmark. And to pay attention to that, first of all, to have honesty and humility with yourself and with the other person, admit when that happened, like, so, if that happens, don't go, oh, but you said, just go, oh, I misheard you, I guess. I'm sorry for reacting that way, right? Like, that's a good starting place to respond appropriately when you realize you've made that mistake. And then second of all, aiming to make that mistake less. How? By actually listening. Because despite everything I've just said about words, you at least want to get the words right.
Yes.
You at least don't want to project and imagine that they said some words that they didn't even said, or imagine that like their tone or their inflection or something like that meant something different. Now it may do. Here's the other thing, right? How are you doing? I'm fine. Maybe that person doesn't mean that. I get that, right? But also maybe, you said, how are you doing? And the person said, I'm fine. And you're imagining that they're saying, I'm not fine, right? Like, so again, dealing with reality is tricky, but this is really what we're talking about, right? It's very difficult to deal with reality when everyone who you're interacting with is also struggling to deal with reality, probably more than you are, because they're not even trying to deal with reality, or in any kind of serious way, at least, because they don't understand any of this. I get that, but that should be like a starting place, at least. And then obviously, the other step is to assume that you are not perceiving correctly most of the time, to assume you're in a trance, and so to actually do practices to try and do that less, to be more in reality. And this is where, all the practices come in. Practices like meditation of various kinds. Now, I want to make this distinction about meditation. I'm happy to do things like what they call guided meditations. I mentioned Dr. Joe Dispenza before. But what that really is it's a guided trance. That's not the kind of meditation we're talking about when we're talking about actually awakening, like people like Eckhart Tolle or Gurdjieff and Uspensky were talking about. In fact, let's talk about that first. So even before you consider breaking yourself out of a trance or lessening your trance, here's the thing to realize. You are in a trance most of the time, so start giving yourself more of the inputs that give you more of what you want in life. So, for instance, this could be the people you surround yourself with, the media that you consume, the place that you work, the environment you're in. And inputs are, often word-based with hypnosis, but not exclusively. Like, for instance, they find that people who live in areas where there's a lot of dirt and decay and buildings in a state of disrepair and buildings are ugly and all the rest of it, like there's higher crime rates and stuff like that. And it's beyond only other factors like socioeconomic or whatever, because even when people are moved from and to them and all the rest of it, it's still whole. So just being in an environment of, for instance, urban decay is going to give you worse outcomes than being in an environment that's beautiful. But that's definitely true for the things that are primary trance activators in you, like words. And so this is where the thing about affirmations and self-hypnosis and positive affirmations, and even, people who do magic spells and all of that kind of stuff. Like, it's all based on the same idea that words have power. Now, I just was saying 10 minutes ago that words don't have power and we should ignore them and they shouldn't be criminalized. So where's the inconsistency coming from? Here's the thing. What I was saying there is they don't actually have such real world consequences that we should punish them equally to physical violence. Necessarily. They can lead to them, but then the act should be the thing that's punished still, not the words. But what's also true is we are very influenced by words. And so you're not going to, even if you agree 100% with everything and you have totally seen the light with everything with this episode, you're not going to snap out of it all of a sudden. So in the meantime may well be the rest of your life, but it'll be for a while at least. If you're aware about this fact, you can start giving yourself positive hypnotic suggestions. Ones that are helpful, ones that are, increase the level of health, increase your level of love, increase your level of wealth, and all that kind of normal stuff, but also increase your level of perception, increase your level of wisdom, increase your level of attunement to the greater realities that, most of us are cut off from because we're in our little, our own world, like you were describing earlier. You can increase the level of inputs, and you can decrease the level of inputs that tell you that you're a victim, that tell you that you're a bad person, that tell you that you're useless, that tell you that your situation is hopeless, that tells you that you're unlovable, that tells you that everyone around you hates you, all of that kind of stuff. Because unfortunately, because we are so susceptible to trance, those suggestions will tend to come true. And unfortunately, they'll tend to come true more easily than suggestions that you are competent and that you are confident and that you are successful and that you are healthy and all the rest of it, for various reasons. But I know we've gone on too long now, so maybe we can talk about that another time. But that's the human tendency. So in fact, you should probably have 5 to 10 affirming, let's say. I don't really like the concept positive thinking because it can be delusory. But you should have maybe 5 to 10 affirming and constructive and helpful inputs for every one, destructive and disempowering and inaccurate input that you get to actually help you. So that's probably actually the primary thing to focus on before you even consider getting yourself out of that trance. And then to get out of the trance, so meditation, I was talking about guided meditation, that's what led me there. So guided meditation is basically a positive affirmation of what we were just talking about. It's a guided trance. It's great, but it's not really what we're talking about here. So meditation that actually snaps you out of trance is things like mindfulness meditation. It's meditation where you are focusing on the things that are around you. It's meditation where you're maybe focusing on your breath. And even better, although more difficult, it's what they call fixed point concentration meditation. So when you're focused on one specific thing, like, traditionally they would do like a candle flame or maybe a mantra, like you would say the same thing over and over again. All these practices, by the way, potentially are not 100% safe and innocent and always positive for the very reason that they disrupt the trance state. And so that can actually, in some cases, make like people have problems. So the people who say that all these different practices are not purely 100% safe and innocuous, that's the word I was looking for, innocuous, are not necessarily 100% wrong. But the reason that they're right is because these practices break the trance. And so it's very important when you do that, and that's why I corrected myself and did the other thing first, that you improve the quality and helpfulness of the inputs you're getting first. Because if you're getting a lot of negative inputs from the people around you, the environment you're in, the media you consume, etc., and then you start doing things to break trance, you can actually have a more... often when you break trance, you can initially it's a rebound, you go back into a deeper trance. So you can actually... So let's say, you do a meditation practice, but then you go and have a 30-minute argument with your wife, or you go and watch like the horrors that are going on in the world and news for 30 minutes or whatever it might be. you can actually end up in a more deeply impacted in a destructive way by those inputs if you've just been doing that practice temporarily. Now, over time, if you keep doing those practices and you are protective of the inputs that you're getting in yourself, over time, you will start to build those brain connections between the conscious part of yourself and the unconscious parts of yourself. And so you will then be overall less susceptible to those inputs, less in a state of trance, more able to choose your own focus, more able to actually be present, more able to deal with objective reality as it actually is. But that's something that happens over time. It's not something that happens immediately after the session. In fact, it can be the opposite. So that's why traditionally a lot of spiritual and religious practices would go to an ashram or go to a monastery or whatever it would be to do these kind of practices. Talk about meditation, but prayer is another example of that if it's done in the same kind of way that I'm talking about now. Because then you're kind of to some degree insulated and protected from the more destructive inputs, so that as you do these practices to free yourself more from the trance, to make yourself more aware of objective reality, or by the way, if you want to say exactly the same thing with a religious connotation, to free yourself from the delusion of sin and to open yourself more to God's grace. That's the same thing. What I just said, in the same way that we're talking about, is it a particle or a wave? Are we opening ourselves more to God's grace, or are we breaking ourselves from a trance and seeing objective reality more? It's the same thing. It's two different words, two different types of words to describe the same fundamental process to me. And if you're religious, you shouldn't be arguing with that. Isn't God the ultimate objective reality? Isn't that the whole point? Right? So there you go. It's the same ultimate practice.
That's something for thought. Ellen, I do love it when you bring these to the table, because it expands my mind. It opens me up in a different way to think about things and check in with myself, see where I'm at, and just get thinking differently. And even though I've heard these things in different ways over here, but I was just thinking about, I love how you've explained this so scientifically, so straight to the point, and just clearly, because it takes that as well to help things land on a deeper level. Like, even though people may have heard this from other people or something kind of like it, you've explained it in a really, at least for me in this experience now, where I'm like, oh, okay, wait a minute, that's landing here. Oh, I've never thought about it like that or in that way. That's interesting. Let me go and contemplate that for a bit. So thank you.
Well, that's fantastic. And that's the point. And this is why I said this is to be open to input, as I said, not just about, being healthier and more successful and whatever. It's also being open to this kind of input, right? To listen to it more, to read it more, to experience it more, so you can hopefully keep having those experiences, you, me, everyone, right? To remind ourselves of this reality over and over and over again. And there comes a point we're sick of hearing this kind of stuff, I'll admit. But as I said, I was reading this kind of stuff, listening to this kind of stuff for 15 years, something like that, on a very frequent basis. You could say I was kind of obsessed with it. But I was programming myself, I kept wanting to. And was I free afterwards? No. Was I still making mistakes afterwards? Yes, many, many, many. Was I? But, I do not claim to be awakened or whatever. But have you ever heard the saying, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king?
I haven't.
Oh, really? Okay. That's it's a good one.
It's a good one, though.
Aphorism. Yeah. So, maybe I'm a half-eyed man even, not a one-eyed man. But, and that's the thing, it's human nature, as it is all mammals, to kind of, to want an edge, I guess, to want to be better, right? To grow. And so to me, understanding this is the most important thing for that. And all the people who you admire, this is the thing, whether they're good people or not, right? There was a politician, celebrity, actor, sports person, spiritual teacher, motivation, any of those people, anyone you might admire or look up to, they almost certainly are in that position because they understand this stuff better than most people. They may not be able to articulate it very well. Part of the reason I'm able to articulate it well, thank you if you feel that way, Chrissy, is obviously because I've read some of the greatest explainers of this stuff of all time and listened to them for a long time, and I've simply internalized how to explain it. But there are other people who actually understand it way better than me in reality, but aren't able to explain it so well because they haven't studied it. They just merely live it. And they're the ones who are, successful in a lot of ways. And again, but they're rarely perfect, right? There's people who are like, highly successful in all these ways, but they're still there. They have a weakness here. They have a whatever here. And again, if we're using Christianity as an example, they talked about, the saints, which I would say would be the equivalent of the people who pursue this path from a Christian religious point of view. They were like traditionally they were thought to be the most taunted and tempted by demons. So the idea being like the forces of delusion, the forces of trance, whatever you might want to call them, like their dedication to be free would cause a kind of, just like I said earlier about doing the meditation practice, it caused a kind of rebound effect where it's actually, so you'll very rarely find a perfect person who lives this in every dimension perfectly, probably never. But there are some who get it more than others. And I'm saying not only are who you might consider the most enlightened or religious or holy or whatever people who get this more, but actually also all the people who are more successful in any dimension, they get this to some degree. As I said, sometimes it's more instinctive. They may not be able to verbalize it because a lot of this stuff is kind of beyond words. But I've spoken to a lot of those people. I think I've, maybe not more than you, Chrissy, but more than most people, I've spoken to a lot of people who are highly successful in all kinds of dimensions of life. And a lot of them are not necessarily intellectual. And a lot of them have not necessarily read any of these books. And a lot of them have maybe not necessarily done these kind of practices, though actually, ironically, I've found that's less rare. If I talk to them, sometimes I find out that they have been, sometimes without even realizing that it was giving them these kind of benefits. But they get it. They get this stuff. You will, even the person who is highly successful in one dimension or another, maybe they're rich, maybe they're powerful, maybe they're much loved, maybe whatever, who you think is an idiot. Like it's very easy to tear people down. And, there are people who are highly successful who I really think are having a very bad effect on other people in the world. But I don't think it's because they're idiots. I think they've understood a lot of this, probably more than me, and they've made the choice to be in maybe that shepherd role or maybe that wolf role. And they feel fully justified in that. And I understand why they feel that way. As I said, shepherds feel justified because if you keep trying to awaken people and everyone doesn't want to be awakened, you're like, I need to look after them for their own best interests, and I don't really care what they think. And wolves think, if people keep hurting themselves, and why don't I use them? They don't really. So it's all very internally consistent from their own point of view. Or there's even beyond wolves. I guess there's people who are like, we should reduce the human race. There's too many of them. Let's cull a few billion or whatever. Even then, I can understand their perspective, even though I don't agree with them, because they understand, again, this stuff better than most. So there's very few people who are in a position that you want to be who don't get this more than you. And that's why they're in the position that you are still aspiring to. I guess that's the point I'm making. And the ditto for me. I guess I said I may be better to explain it than the average person doing better than me, but that's only because I studied it for such a long time. I probably should be more busy living it and less busy studying it, but that's part of, I think, my role is I am an explainer. And so I have to really understand how to explain things, and, obviously embody to some degree, otherwise I'm just a bullshitter. But some people do a lot more better at embodying than explaining. Some people are better at explaining than embodying. Some people are right in the middle.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is definitely a topic I think we are going to get a lot of comments below. So at least that's my hope, because again, these are the discussions I like. It's that expanding, it's that thinking, it's opening up yourself to something else, and also to the impact it does have on your way of living. Because just seeing, and I know we're at time, but just also seeing and recognizing the impact that this can have emotionally then as well, which we haven't even really touched in our health. I can see and identify myself where I've been doing those things, and then the impact that has had, that knock-on effect into my own regulatory system, nervous system, my mental state for however long. So I was like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, hang on a second. Well, let me not get so drawn in. Let me not get so far. Oh, wow, I really was in a trance. Let me pull back. So I think that we can also carry that conversation on to another time. So, but
100%. And I didn't get a chance to go through my research, but yeah, thank you for bringing that up. We'll finish with that. Yeah, I hope it was obvious, but I'll just reiterate what you said there, that yeah, upset causes ill health. And the more upset that you experience for real reasons, maybe that's appropriate because it forces you to change and make different decisions that are better for you and all the rest, fine. But most of the upset most of us have these days is not real. It's just because we're in a trance and we're responding to things that aren't even really real. And if we have that much less upset, because we are less reactive, because we are less in a trance, and even that when things do go wrong, we're kind of able to remember some of the fundamental truths about reality and about life, which help us to see that these things, while important, are not the end of the world. We will experience a lot less stress and a lot less upset. We will sleep better. Our cortisol, DHEA balance will be better. Our level of oxytocin and dopamine will be better. Our mitochondria will not be under such strain. Our thyroid won't be under such strain. Our adrenals will not be, overblown. Like, it absolutely has an impact on your biochemistry. This is the crazy thing. Every single word that you hear has an impact on your biochemistry. Every single word that you say has an impact on your biochemistry. Every single word inside your head, your internal monologue, has an impact on your biochemistry. So if you can shift the words and shift the level of response you have to those words, it has a massive impact, positive impact on your biochemistry if you're shifting it into a constructive, empowering, relaxing, and even joyful and loving direction.
Beautiful. And this is why I love doing this podcast. Thank you, Owen. So our lovely listeners, you know what to do. Leave your comments below. Let's spark up another conversation. Please also remember that supporting our sponsors supports this podcast, so we can continue to bring episodes like this to you at no cost. And again, and as always, we'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed that, I recommend watching our latest episode, which you can do by clicking above. And make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, and share with anyone who you think might appreciate it. Thank you.